Hi, I'm Dominique.
And I'm Avalon.
And welcome to the very first episode of Dark Matters, Dark Tales of Halloween. It's officially spooky season, and to kick off the month of October, we'll be talking about the origins of Halloween today. And also a quick side note, if you are watching us on YouTube, then you can see that our setup is a little bit different to get into the spooky mood. And to fit in with our theme, we are sitting in the dark, dressed in our pajamas, and we've lit a pumpkin-scented candle, so we're going all the way. We just want to mention that, so yeah, let's jump right in. So, as we all know, Halloween is on the 31st of October, and people usually celebrate it by dressing up in costumes, trick-or-treating, or if you're a little older, then you might go to a party and get drunk. But no matter what they're doing, most people usually see it as a fun holiday. But have you ever wondered how Halloween became a thing? The tradition actually originated about 2,000 years ago with the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. Samhain's a pagan religious festival, which Celts believed to be the most important of the quarterly festivals. And according to early texts, Samhain was a mandatory celebration which lasted 3 days and 3 nights. This festival marked the end of summer and the harvest and the beginning of a cold and difficult winter. This meant, of course, that there weren't usually as many crops growing, and so this time was often associated with death. It's believed that failure to participate in this festival would result in punishment from the gods, usually in some form of illness, or again, death. So death was a big option here.
Yeah, that was a big part of it for sure.
Yeah. So during the celebrations, the Celts would dress up in costumes made of animal heads and skin, and they would also build sacred bonfires in which they burnt animals and crops as sacrifices to the gods.
Right, it's interesting to see how it started as like a pagan thing, but death, like you said, was always a part of it, and it's interesting how it's progressed to what it is today, which is like totally different.
Very different, yeah.
Right, so the Celts also believe that Samhain was when the barriers between the physical world and the spirit world were the thinnest, so it was more possible for humans to interact with the residents of the other world, which is really interesting to me. But for some reason they thought that day, like, there was most connection to the other world, so
right.
that kind of translates nowadays with like the death and like kind of that whole theme.
Right, like the spookiness of Halloween and ghosts and stuff like that.
Exactly. And so a few years later, the Celts were conquered by the Roman Empire, and as the two cultures kind of mixed together, Samhain was combined with 2 Roman festivals. So they kind of lost ownership of that kind of, and it just became conflated with these other 2. So the first of the other 2 festivals was Feralia, which was a day when the Romans remembered the dead, and the second was to honor the Roman goddess of fruit and trees, which her name was Pomona, which I thought was funny because I graduated from Cal Poly Pomona, and I did not know it meant anything, honestly. Like, I just never thought about it. So they kind of mixed all of these like celebrations together, and again, that's like just making way for what Halloween is today. And then in the year 609, Pope Boniface, we're just assuming that's how we say it. We're like going off of like our limited knowledge of Italian.
Yeah, we're guessing in Italian.
Yeah, so we're thinking it's Boniface the Fourth rededicated the Pantheon in Rome to all the martyrs, and November 1st became All Saints' Day or All Souls' Day. It's like the 2 names are kind of used interchangeably. So the day before, which is October 31st, came to be known as All Hallows' Eve, and many of the customs eventually became more Christianized, as they do, as we were talking about earlier. It kind of always goes that way. It became like a Christian thing, even though it started out as pagan.
Right.
And then once Halloween spread to America, it wasn't as popular due to the Protestant beliefs, and so it was more common in the southern colonies, which, I don't know, maybe the southern, like, actually now that I think of it, there's like Louisiana and all that, and they have like more like voodoo, you know what I mean? So maybe that's why they were like more open to it, but in the South. But yeah, like how America was then and even now, like they're just very
puritanical right there.
Yeah, like traditional beliefs, so they weren't really into it at first. But many single young women would perform tricks to figure out who their future husband would be during this time. And some of these practices included throwing apple peels or cracking eggs to see if they could see their like partner's initials in them. And it was also believed, and this is really spooky, that if you lit a candle and looked in the mirror, you would see a reflection of their face. So I'm assuming that's on All Hallows Eve, like that. Yeah. On that day, you could like see their reflection if you lit a candle and looked in a mirror, which is like, I wouldn't even want to do that.
No,
that's
me either.
So
I
creepy.
would be so spooked out. I would be like, all right, listen, can we just meet some other way?
Yeah, that's so creepy. And I'm assuming now that I think of it, I wonder if like they didn't see anyone. They're like, I guess
Love
I'm not
and
going
be
to get
alone.
married. Yeah. But like no one saw anything, right? I don't know. I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting.
And we talked about too how we feel like it was a big practice back then because obviously there were very different times and women didn't have as much freedom and power
Yeah,
as they
like,
do now.
Careers were not a thing for women.
Yeah, definitely not. So I feel like your life was very impacted by who would be your husband. So I feel like they were just desperately like chucking
anything.
peeling apples and cracking eggs to be like, oh God, I hope it's not like the town drunk or anything.
Yes, exactly. Like anything to just figure out like if they were going to be okay in the future.
Right.
And this is very interesting. So like I said, it really wasn't popular when Halloween first came to America because people were like, yeah, we don't fuck with that. Like they're just very Christian. Mm-hmm. But in the late 1800s, there's an influx of Irish immigrants, my people. That's probably when my family came here in America. And this helped the holiday become more popular because like we said, it was a Celtic holiday. So they kind of like, with the increase of Irish people, they brought their own customs, of course. And so it became more popular throughout the country. And I thought this was funny. As I mentioned you earlier, I thought this always happens that people will pick and choose the thing they like from a culture and then hate the people of the culture. Like, if you don't know, Irish immigrants were treated really bad when they came here, but they were like, hey, your holidays are all right.
Yeah,
but we're gonna hate you.
Like,
I just thought that was interesting. But so after that, it became much more like normalized, I guess, and more popular. And people started dressing up in costumes and going house to house to ask, instead of for candy, they would ask for food or money, which is basically begging. Like they were just like going to the house and being like, hey, want to give me money? But eventually, obviously, that translated to the modern day practice of trick or treating. But yeah, I mentioned that to Dom. I was like, we should do that. We should just dress up and be like, hi, I want money.
Yeah,
I don't want
take
candy.
No candy.
Yeah, I don't take candy. I'll take PayPal, Venmo.
Right. So the origins of trick-or-treating actually go all the way back, starting with All Souls Day / All Saints Day. And back then, people would actually give out these things called soul cakes, and this practice was called souling. But in the 1920s, pranking became more popular, and this night became associated with mischief and vandalism. And I feel like this is why, too, in some parts of the country, people refer to it as Mischief Night.
Yeah, I totally didn't even know that was a thing. But it, like we talked about this, that like it's kind of... It's like there's like Halloween's always associated with like getting up to no good and like doing like bad things, but like I didn't know why.
Houses,
yeah, exactly. Like people definitely prank a lot, but I didn't know that like I never thought about it that like it had an origin, you know?
Right, I didn't know it was so prevalent. And obviously the people didn't like this, so they made the move towards more community-oriented events, which is how Halloween parties first started. And people also started offering treats at their homes, like toys, fruits, and nuts, and this was to keep children on their best behavior. And it actually wasn't until after the Great Depression, when the sugar rations went away, is when candy manufacturers saw the opportunity and they began to advertise for the holiday, and now giving out candy is tradition.
Right. That's funny that it started out as basically bribery. They're like, okay, like don't go vandalize the city and don't get up to some sketchy thing. So here's candy or here's like some fruit. Just be a good kid. That's Pretty what much. It is. That's how it like became what it is today.
Yeah.
So we also wanted to mention something that's very popular, specifically where we live in SoCal, and I know in like Florida and probably throughout the U.S. and elsewhere as well, which is scary amusement parks, or like amusement parks that do like Halloween events, like throughout usually the month of October. So Knott's Berry Farm was the first to open an after-hours Halloween haunt, and this was all the way back in 1973, which I didn't realize it had been around for that long because like, I don't know, I just think of it as like a modern thing. But yeah, the first time they did that was all the way back in the early 70s. And Universal Studios followed by starting Fright Nights in 1991, which was changed to the now very well-known Horror Nights.
Right.
And so people will go into like different themed mazes and scare zones. And if you don't know, people will wait in line for like 3 or 4 hours to get into these. Like, it's no joke. They pay a bunch of money and they stay super late and they'll wait for a long time just to even go into one maze. And some people love it. I know you're going to tell us about your experience. I've never been. I'm too chicken to go, but what was it like for you?
Well, it was so funny because I'm also such a chicken, and the entire time I was there, I was like, why did I decide to do this to myself? I don't know. Yeah. Also, so it's very much like you mentioned, they do after hours. So usually after the park closes down at their normal time, or they'll close even earlier, they'll have this special event that usually runs pretty late, like, I don't know, maybe like 2, 3 in the morning.
Right.
So basically they set up different scare zones, and then it'll definitely be themed. They put a lot of effort into this, obviously. So there's sections of the park where monsters will be roaming around and they'll be free to scare you.
Oh, is
and
that
then,
so they have scare, like, not scare zones, so that's like
Yes.
normal. Oh, okay, I thought it was like a constant, like, you're never gonna escape them.
well, I mean, there are sections of the park that don't have anything, but majority
Yeah.
of them do.
Most of them do.
Yeah,
that
so they
makes
have
sense.
scare zones, and then like you said, they also have different mazes, and they usually have like different themes and stuff like that. You're right, there are usually a lot of people, but I feel like it kind of just adds to the atmosphere, you know, that it's
Right.
just what happens. But when I went, I felt kind of targeted. I felt like I was an easy target because I'm like the shortest of my friends. I'm like 5'1". So maybe it was the fact that I was so short, or maybe it was because I looked absolutely terrified. But they always targeted me, and I'm like, this is unfair. This is
I
discrimination.
feel like it's like dogs. They like smell your fear.
Yeah.
And they're like, that one.
that one. We have to go
yeah.
scare that one. Yeah. So I went twice. Again, I don't know why I did it, but I mean, it was a fun experience. I probably wouldn't do it again though.
That's crazy. Yeah, I feel like I would be too scared, especially for the Universal one, because I know that we were discussing this earlier.
Yeah.
Knott's, you can't be touched there, but at Universal they can touch you, like actually come
Yeah.
up and like grab you, and that is so scary. I feel like my instincts are just to hit people when they come over to
Right,
touch me,
yeah.
and I just don't think it would be a good situation. Like, I'm too scared to do that.
Yeah, if you're not into like jump scares and being startled, definitely
Because I get
don't do
scared
that.
so easily. Like at work, someone will say something, and I'm like, like I get scared easily. So I'm like, oh my god, if there was like an actual monster when I looked up, you
Right.
know what I mean? Like, no.
I'll be honest, majority, like I said, I don't know why I did, because majority of the time when I went through the maze, I was like clutching my friend's arm, my eyes were closed.
Yeah, that's how I am in scary movies. Like, I literally will like cover my ears and
yeah.
like close my eyes. I'm like, I can't deal. Like, I can't do it. You know what I mean? So yeah, I couldn't do it personally, but I commend your bravery.
Yeah, like I said, it was like in the spirit of Halloween. I just wanted to try,
Yeah.
see what it was like. I don't regret it, but like I said, I
You're like,
wouldn't.
yeah.
I'm not jumping at the chance to go again.
Yeah, for sure.
And we just want to point out how different it was back then when Horror Nights first opened. It was like in the very early 90s. The ticket prices were so low. It was below like $20, I think, and it was even buy one get one off, get one free. So you can tell it was a very different time back
Yeah,
then.
they were
Tickets
definitely, like-
nowadays are like $100.
Oh yeah, they're like over $100 for sure. And like, I think back then they were kind of like, let's just see if this sticks. You know what I mean? They
Right,
probably
they
saw
were
Knott's
testing
doing
it
it,
out.
and they're like, well, maybe we can try it. And it's crazy how far it's come, because it's I feel like Universal is the one that's the most legit nowadays. Like,
Yeah,
that's what
very
I've heard is
popular.
that, yeah, because I know like in recent years they've had what's it called, Stranger
Yeah.
Things themed mazes, so they're thematic and they're like trendy, you know what I mean? And they really go, because it's Universal, they make movies. If you're not familiar with Universal Studios, it's like the Universal, like, what is it called?
Like
Univer-
company.
the
I don't-
corporation, you know what I'm talking about?
I
Like
don't
the
know
big
exactly.
globe at the beginning of movies, that's Universal. And so
Yeah.
like they have these parks that are just Hollywood productions, so it's really, really legit. And I feel like that's another reason I couldn't go, because it would be too like too real, you know?
Yeah. So now we're going to dive more into the myths and legends surrounding Halloween. So the first thing we want to talk about is jack-o'-lanterns, because it's obviously a very popular staple.
Yeah, I
of
do that every
Halloween.
year. Every
Yeah.
year I get a pumpkin and make a jack-o'-lantern. I never thought about where it came from though.
Yeah, it's a very big thing though. It's very normal to carve pumpkins and go to pumpkin patches and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But jack-o'-lanterns actually originated from an Irish folklore, and according to legend, one night a drunkard named Jack actually trapped the devil in a tree. I don't know how he did this, but he
Okay,
somehow
he
trapped the
managed.
devil in the tree.
Yeah.
And in exchange for letting him go, Jack made him promise to never claim his soul. And because of that, he was like, okay, well then I don't even have to worry about being a good guy because I'm not going to hell. So he then proceeded to be an asshole for the rest of his life. And when he died, heaven was like, well, we don't want him. You know, he did such horrible things. So then he tried to go back to Satan, and he was like, hey friend, remember me? We met before. And Satan was all like, yeah, I remember you, and I remember that bargain, so like get the hell out of here. No pun intended. And so he threw him out, and to add insult to injury, he threw a piece of coal at him too. Like,
I love that.
so with nowhere to go, Jack put the lump of coal into a turnip, which is what they used back then. It wasn't actually pumpkins, it was like turnips and beets. and other vegetables like that. I don't know, is turnip a vegetable?
Yeah, I think it's a vegetable. Yeah,
so they used stuff like that, and he used it as a lantern to wander the earth because he had no resting place, basically.
Yeah, he couldn't go to heaven, couldn't go to hell.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of the Tale of the Beetle and the Bard in Harry Potter. I don't know if you remember that.
I like vaguely remember it.
Yeah, basically these three brothers encounter.
Okay, yeah.
So they encounter death, right? And they're trying to outsmart him, and the other two did not. So I feel like it kind of reminds me of that. This guy was all like, "Oh, I'm so smart. I can defeat death." But in the end,
what does he have? A piece of coal and a turnip.
Exactly.
That's what you get for being an asshole.
Definitely came to bite him in the ass.
Yeah, and I love this story because, again, as I mentioned, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but I'm Irish. That's why I mentioned the thing about the Irish immigrants.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I love that the Irish story, like in the first sentence, it's like, so the town drunkard. I'm like, yes. Like,
Very Irish.
That's my people. Like, it just made me laugh. But yeah, I love that story. As soon as you told me that, I was like, I wouldn't have it any other way. I love that. It made me laugh.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. Okay, so next we want to talk about vampires because that's another, I think, thing that's synonymous with Halloween in America. And so vampires, as far as like the idea of Dracula and the modern concept of vampires specifically, or not specifically in America, but I guess like Twilight and those kind of vampires, it goes back to Vlad the Impaler. So if you don't know, like he had many names. There was Vlad the Impaler, Vlad the Third, Vlad Dracula, and then translated into just Dracula, because Dracula was his like surname, I guess, like his last name.
Oh, I didn't even know that actually.
Yeah,
I just knew it was
Vlad
the Impaler.
Yeah, because Dracula means like it, like of the dragon or of the dragons. Yeah, so his dad was like, whatever his dad's name was, like let's just say it was like George. This was not his name, but let's say it was George. It would be like George of the Dragons.
George of the Dragons.
And then he was Vlad of the Dragons. So that's like already a badass name. But then it translated, or like it ended up just being Dracula when the story was written.
Oh, interesting. So that's where we got the name from.
Yeah, so that's where it came from, right? And so he was a Romanian prince. So the whole idea of like Transylvania, where they live, that's where that comes from. And the story Dracula, the actual book, I don't know if you guys have read it or not. I tried to read it and I was like,
it's hard.
What's up with this language? Yeah, it's like really hard to read because it was written a very long time ago. Yeah. But basically the story was based on him, Vlad the Impaler, but it was honestly not nearly as brutal as the real one because so basically like there's way too much to get into. So we'll just give you like a really quick synopsis. But if you listen to the podcast Dictators, they have an episode on Vlad the Impaler, which I highly recommend because they go into much more detail and it's super interesting.
That shit's wild.
It's wild. But basically he, like his name implies, he impaled a lot of people. He got a liking for impaling people. He was almost like an early serial killer because he had a lot of turmoil in his family in his early life. And then he really took that out by killing people. Yeah. But it was also like he was like a warlord. So it wasn't just like random people.
Right.
But he did just kill random people.
Yeah, back then I feel like it wasn't out of the norm to kind of go around.
It wasn't like he was deviant, but he wasn't, it was just like the way it was. You know what I mean? Like he was a prince. Like, what are you going to do? But yeah, basically he impaled many, many people. And there was like a myth, I guess you could say, that started coming about that he would drink their blood. And because people said they saw it. They said they saw him drinking blood, like at the scene of all these people being impaled.
Well, I mean, it's not that far of a stretch.
It's not that far of a stretch, exactly. Because he was so awful that it's like, yeah, I would believe anything people said about him. And so then that made way for like the idea of Dracula, this like vampire who lives forever because he drinks people's blood. So yeah, again, the real Dracula was so much worse than the story. So
is he the one who would literally like impale people's heads on like sticks and put it outside his castle or something?
Yeah, he like stacked up like heads one time. I think that was a specific time, but he would impale people all the time, like alive, and he would even like. Yeah, no, he impaled them alive. Like sometimes he would heat up the stick before. God. Yeah,
no,
it was disgusting. I don't want to get into any details here. I would say listen to the podcast because it's like a really professional one, and they do a really good job of
covering that history,
covering it like as best they can without being too brutal. But it was horrible what he did.
That's way worse than the legend of what so vampires much worse.
Yeah, because vampires are like sexualized and kind of this
sexy
thing.
Sparkle in the sun.
Yeah, exactly. But he was. Like pure evil. It's crazy the things he did. But that's really the idea of Dracula and like modern day vampires. But the idea of just a vampire-like creature that like lives forever and kind of takes life out of people is really nothing new. Like that's been around for thousands of years and very various cultures like around the world, which when I started looking into the research for this, I wasn't really surprised because it's kind of just a general like idea that people would think of, you know. So in China, there were I'm probably gonna say this wrong, Jiangxi, and they were evil spirits that attacked people and drained their life energy. So you can see how that's kind of like a vampire. And some historians even think that vampires went all the way back to ancient Egyptians because there was myth that referenced demons summoned from other worlds. And ancient Babylonians and Greeks might have also believed in reanimated corpses. So you can see how like each piece kind of contributes to what we think of as vampires now.
Right, and
or,
it's
like,
interesting to see that so many different cultures had similar beliefs.
Yeah, they like came up with this on their own, and they were all like pretty similar. And archaeologists have also found vampire burials, as they call them, in which the body of the deceased is pinned to the earth with wooden stakes or iron bars in countries like Poland, Bulgaria, and even here in the U.S.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that to be in the U.S., but then again, like we did have the witch trials, so it's quite similar. Yeah. So they would kill them like that in hopes that they wouldn't come back. Basically, they were like, this must be a vampire, so we have to kill him like this so that they can't come back from the grave.
Oh, wait. So they killed them by literally, like, staking them to the ground?
I don't know if that's actually how they killed them. That's a good point. They might have killed them and then done that, but I don't know what the legend is, if, like, you have to kill them that way, or, like, I think you just kill them and then just stake them to the ground so it's like they're tied to the ground, you know what I mean? I think that's... I don't really know. Maybe they actually kill them that way.
I was going to say, though, like, geez, this person's already dead, and you can't even treat their body with respect. You gotta stake them to the ground.
They did horrible things to these bodies because some of the graves had decapitated skeletons or skulls with bricks shoved between the jaws. So again, these were just ways that they thought they could kill vampires because they would do the most to kill vampires, you know what or somebody who they thought was a vampire.
Right, because they obviously didn't want them to come back to life and
because they're like the living dead.
People.
Exactly, yeah. These practices may have originated in the Middle Ages as early as the 11th century when tales about vampires started to emerge in Europe. So that's crazy to me that like these ideas that we have of vampires started all the way back then, and that people kind of thought of it as just something you need to know, like for us, because we know these things because we've like read books or seen movies or whatever.
Yeah.
But back then, it's funny that this was like changing your tire or something that you just need to know. It's like, oh, well, if you encounter a vampire, this is how you kill them. Yeah, it's really interesting. But yeah, so people would bury suspected vampires in these like types of ways into the 18th century, so not that long ago, in Poland. And a vampire grave was even discovered here in the US in Connecticut, and it was from like the 1830s, so again, not that long ago. And people, like I mentioned earlier, they pretty much did this so that they could put them to rest eternally so they wouldn't come back. I don't know what made them think they were vampires. That's very interesting to me, because with the witch hunts, I know they were literally just like, she's a woman, she's probably a witch. Like, it was based on nothing.
Right, it's literally just them pointing fingers at each other.
Yeah, or like, it became even like, I don't like her, so she's a witch, so like, so they could get rid of her. Which if you were convicted of being a vampire, you were gonna be killed in a horrible way. So,
right, like, good luck to you, there's no way out now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so speaking of witches, we're now gonna jump into how they kind of originated and why they're associated with Halloween, because originally didn't even start with this one holiday. Witches were just a thing back then, and the word witch actually came from the word Wicca, which means wise one. And in the old days, they obviously didn't have much in the way of, medicine and technology, so when people became ill, it was much more dangerous back then. So some women actually used herbal remedies and different practices to help, and they were even known to act as midwives. So they were actually very helpful. I would say they're kind of like nurses.
Early doctors, like as best as they could do.
Yeah, exactly, because obviously they didn't have the medicines like we said they have now. So they would kind of just use whatever they had to try to help. But as Christianity spread, as we mentioned before, the church pushed the narrative that all healing should be done through the church, and then witchcraft was seen as heresy and it's like the devil's work.
Right.
And this, of course, like we mentioned, led to the Salem witch trials and the persecution of people, mostly women, who were accused of
almost
witchcraft.
Entirely women.
Yeah. And we don't know exactly how this got associated with Halloween. I think it was mostly because this was associated as, like, the devil's work or bad magic, stuff like that. So that's pretty much just how it became. And I actually don't know what all the legends, the ugly hag.
Actually, that kind of makes sense with the cauldron, though, because they were like mixing things up.
Yeah,
but it was
cauldron
to
makes
heal
sense.
people. It wasn't to curse them.
Yeah, it wasn't like magical
I don't
potion.
understand where that, like, I feel like there's like a disconnect between they were like practicing medicine and to the Christians of the time, they were cursing people.
Because I think it was, again, because of the narrative that the Christian church was trying to pursue, that anything that didn't have to do with the church was seen as bad. So I feel like this practice was kind of just villainized. And so,
because it was pagan. It just like, wasn't based in like a organized religion or anything.
Right. Yeah, and then I don't actually know why they became associated with the actual Halloween, because it wasn't anything specific. The only one that I could see tied back to the witch like folklore is they actually obviously didn't fly on brooms, but they would use brooms to kind of like cleanse the ritual space. So I feel like that's
sage, like burning sage.
No, they would actually like take a broom, like
like they would just
broom
clean
and
it.
just like sweep the ritual space. So yeah, not that magic, but I guess that's where the broom legend came from. I don't know about the
But a lot of
hats
people use brooms.
Yeah,
you know
I guess,
what I mean? Like it's funny how they got associated with all these things when it was just like they were just practicing medicine.
Very true. But again, I think that is because of the time and the message that was being sent out.
That's crazy. That sucks. Like they were really just like helping society.
Right, that's what I was saying. Like they're literally trying to help you, and then all of a sudden the church is like evil, and they're like, oh yeah, evil.
That's so crazy. And yeah, so many women were killed over that, literally just for like petty reasons, because they're like, well, I don't like her, so she's a witch. If you don't know about the witch trials here in America in Salem, definitely look it up. It's very interesting. We should do an episode on that. Yeah, we definitely should, because we'll definitely do an episode on it. It's crazy. Yeah. But the last thing we wanted to mention was ghosts, which of course are kind of like synonymous with Halloween. The idea of like the sheet over the head we kind of talked about. Like we don't really know where that came from specifically.
Like who decided? I'm just gonna put this white sheet over this person, draw 2 black dots on their face, and that's it.
Why do we think that's what ghosts look like? Maybe they don't look like that at all. Maybe they're not like. Maybe they just look like normal people. You know what I mean? But whatever, that's like what we think of them as. But the idea of ghosts came from an ancient belief that a person's spirit exists outside their body and may stick around after their body physically dies. And again, this probably goes back to the idea of the barrier between the physical and spirit world breaking down on Samhain. So like we mentioned earlier, there's
this barrier between the world.
Yeah, and the barrier like breaks down on that day, or it's very thin that day. So like some people, I guess like the idea is that you could like interact with people from the other world, or they could come here. Yeah, exactly. So that's, I guess, where like the idea of ghost is coming from. But again, I don't know where the sheet comes from. Like, that's just kind of a thing we do. I don't know. Do people do that in other countries? I always say things and then I realize, like, that might not be the case in other countries.
Right, it might be a very
Americanized. Yeah, exactly. So, I don't know. Let us know if you're from another country. Do you wear sheets to represent ghosts? Or are you like, what the hell are you talking about right now?
Yeah, or even your Halloween practice. I know some countries don't even celebrate Halloween.
Yeah,
I know that's a very American thing. So, yeah, we'd love to know what you guys do for Halloween, if you even celebrate it.
Yeah, or if there's like a similar holiday, or even like Day of the Dead, like in Mexico, that's not at all the same thing, but I feel like that's more like
the traditional celebrate like the dead.
Yeah, like it's celebrating the dead truly. Like, it's not about just dressing up for fun. Yeah. But yeah, if you have any celebrations like that, let us know, because that would be very interesting.
Yeah, we're super interested in all the different cultures and see like what they do.
Because this is just American. Because I like to, like, I always think it, like I said, I think it's universal, and then I'm like, no, this might not be practiced like anywhere else. So yeah.
Yeah, but that is the end of this week's episode, you guys. We hope you enjoyed listening, and we will be back next Monday with our next spooky episode. And to make sure you don't miss any announcements, follow us on our Instagram at darkmatterpod or our Twitter at darkmatter_pod. And as always, our full list of sources is on our website, darkmatterpod.com.
Right, and if you're listening on Spotify, be sure to follow us, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, it would be a huge help if you left us a review. Also, be sure to subscribe and like our videos on YouTube if you enjoyed watching. And if you enjoyed listening, we'd really appreciate if you spread the word about our podcast to your family and friends, because that's the best way for us to grow, and we really do appreciate it. All right, thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye.